these programs are meant to help them not be able to engage in those behaviors because they're watched 24/7 or, 12 hours a day. And we're then observing to hear what's happening when did they go home and have the snack? Okay, they're consistently skipping it. Or once they leave the facility, they're binging and purging, or something like that, whatever it might be. So we're listening to those types of behaviors, but it's contained because there's only one meal you're dealing with. Only one. Hi, my name is Jill Sechi, registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist.
My name is Mateus Bilhomes. I'm a registered dietitian as well.
Alrighty. Well, we're digging into the next level of care down from residential, which is partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient programming. So we thought we would talk a little bit about our experiences on an outpatient level, getting individuals to that level of care. And then on the back end, we'll talk. I have worked in that level of care, so I'm gonna be the guest expert and talk a little bit about my experience being in that level of care. But I thought we would talk um, on this version of just YouTube version, I guess, of just our experiences with it and challenges and what works and what doesn't, those various things, so that we can be supportive and hopefully validate some of your own experiences too, if you're an outpatient provider. So I know, excuse me, when I've been on an outpatient level of care, and trying to get someone into a higher level of care, it's a work of art, is what I'll say. There's a lot of area, if we think of the whole hiking analogy, there's a lot of like maneuvering that you're trying to do to try to get around obstacles. That could be, but it's the holidays, but it's my birthday, but what about my cat? What about my dog? Various things, I'm in school. I have to take off school. I mean, there's a lot of navigation. I think a lot of difficulty as an outpatient provider getting someone to take a break from their life to focus on their recovery. So I guess as an outpatient provider, I would definitely say that partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient programming is very appropriate for a client that needs more containment. They just need to take a break from their life. They can't focus on all these various things. Either they're too malnourished, they're too depressed or anxious, various things that are going on. So they just need to kind of take a little bit of a breather. So partial hospitalization is typically 7 days, and we'll go more in depth of that in the back end, but like typically 7 days, at least 5 to 7 days, and it's about 10 to 12 hours. And an intensive outpatient program is usually 3 to 5 days. I would say on normally three, and it's about 3 hours, maybe a little bit longer when they go into like they meet with a therapist and the dietitian or something like that. So, getting them to that level of care and trying to figure out what they need, I think is a challenge for sure. So, yeah, so I'll just kind of start with that. Mateus, I'll let you kind of swing in here a little bit based on all of
Yeah. So, I my experiences with that process have been sometimes a little confusing, because I'm not all-knowing, but sometimes I have a really good idea that this person probably needs residential. Sometimes I feel very strongly that they need to be in a different environment altogether, to be able to work on their recovery. And I have mixed feelings about IOP and PHP because sometimes when people are stepping down from residential, I think that it's incredible, to go through PHP and IOP. But sometimes when people try to start with IOP, PHP, it can it feels confusing for everybody involved, And I've personally had really low success with people starting at lower levels of care, but I also see it sometimes as a good gateway because it takes a lot of convincing, a lot of planning, for them to even be in the headspace of doing. We talk about residential, they shut down, and we're like, well, maybe PHP,
yeah,
that
trying
you
to get
can
them in
still
the
go
door.
home.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the conversation is with parents because it feels very scary to have a teenager, full time somewhere else.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that digging a little bit more into what is appropriate could be helpful, because I think that it all. it also falls back on us to coordinate with the higher level of care team to let them know, like, hey, I've been working with this person for the last 3 months, and I think that IOP is absolutely not appropriate of an option, you know?
Mhm.
And my experience, they have been open to that, but sometimes those things, when they finally start moving, I just hear back, they're like, oh, they're now doing IOP here. I'm like, oh, no.
I know. Well, I think part of it is starting with getting him to do the intake call, right? That's always the first start of like, okay, you're describing what it is. You're trying to help them understand what it all looks like for them. And then getting them to call and do an intake call. And I think it's really frustrating sometimes when they do the intake call is that it's usually about maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And it's someone that's never worked with them. They don't know them. And rarely do they call the provider to get any input. And so it's basically the client or the parent, whomever's calling, giving them their side of the story. And then I've had it many times where they've called and they're like, oh, I think IOP is good. I'm like, no, 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 they need to be in residential. So can it's almost like they undercut you a little bit because they haven't gotten your thought patterns or, your not thought patterns, but your assessment as a provider as well. So they might really minimize or, not tell the full like transparency of what they're struggling with, which I think sometimes, is where the PHP or IOP is recommended inappropriately by one of the intake coordinators at a facility. So,
Hmm.
so I get it. They don't have hours on hours to interview these individuals, but there's no attempt typically. Sometimes the patient doesn't give an ROI or release of information or something like that. But that can be really frustrating. I know that's a really big barrier that I've gotten into where I feel like they need to be in residential, maybe partial, and then they can pop them up to residential or something like that because their behaviors are so poor. But sometimes they'll just start them at IOP. Is that a little bit of what you experience?
Yeah, and you hit it right on the spot because um I think that that intake call, especially for, adults, is an opportunity for the eating disorder to kind of show up and
Mhm.
be a little, you know, not truthful or not fully transparent, so that intake person gets maybe a watered down version of what's really happening, you know. And it's hard to keep tabs about what's happening, with every single client, with every single recommendation that you make. Because I've had clients that it took weeks. Like,
Mhm.
please call this facility. And I've had clients that I talked about it, like, I think we're gonna need high level of care. These are the facilities that I would recommend reaching out to. And then I get a message that they got admitted. I'm like, oh, it took 3 days. Okay. So sometimes it's hard to keep up, with everything that's happening real time. And I can imagine that for the facility, sometimes it can be a similar experience. But but yeah, I think it would be good to talk a little bit more about what each level of care is really appropriate for.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, that's good. So we'll talk more about that in depth. But as outpatient providers, it's like to your point, it's really hard sometimes to get them in. It can take weeks, like you said. What I would say I would do oftentimes is that when you're in the field long enough, and Mateus, I feel like you're probably there at this point in your career, is that you get a sense. You read the intake information when they come into your facility, you look at their weight, you look at their behaviors, you're like, oh, you get that gut feeling. Oh, this is someone who needs more containment and more support. And so you got to build rapport with them. At least they're coming into you. Maybe you and I are the first times they've ever gotten treatment or support. And so, you have to kind of unfortunately be with them, get the medical eval or maybe various things to kind of give proof of evidence that they need more help, versus just you saying it, or maybe or get them into a therapist or something like that. Sometimes they're so medically compromised that, I bypass the therapist or any medical eval that they've had, and then, but essentially insist that they go into residential, or I'm not able to work with them or whatever it might be. But a lot of times it's that in between place where you're just trying to build your case to get them to go into that next level of care, because more than likely this level of care is not going to work for them. So, anyway, that's kind of the first part, and that can take weeks. So I would say a lot of times I will, after I meet with them a couple of times, I kind of say, I'm going to work with you about 4 to 6 weeks, but we're probably going to need a little bit more support and help. And so I might kind of lay down the foundation a little bit, and then begin to work with them and talk with them, and then give them some psychoeducation or medical education, and then, you know, get them to eventually call or look at different facilities if it's a parent or an adult or something like that. So a lot of times I'll say that at the beginning to kind of set the expectation of more than likely what's going to happen, just based on my experience and my gut feeling. I've had a rarity. I've had maybe 2 to 5 clients in my whole career that what I thought they needed was they were able to get through it. But usually those are people that are highly wanting recovery, that they quickly build insight and they're very motivated. They have a good support system, whatever it might be. But most of the times they need some type of higher level of care. And so, as an outpatient provider, I try to set the expectation, have to build rapport. And like, to your point, it may take 3 to 6 months, or no, not sorry, 1 month to 3 months to get them into that next level of care, which can feel uncomfortable when you know that medically they may be compromised, or it's dangerous for them to actually be on this level of care.
Yeah, I can I can think of a couple of clients that surprised me in a positive way like that.
Yeah.
Definitely not uh the most frequent thing to happen. Um, but it's I think it's I think it's one of the most challenging parts of this job,
Yeah.
to be honest, because you can't make headway sometimes.
Okay.
You holding space for something terrible, for a terrible situation. It's not a healthy place to be, and sometimes the work is about not letting things get further, you know, worse.
Hmm.
But it's a time that I have to be very vigilant of my mental health,
Hmm.
so I don't get in my head about making it about me. Like,
Hmm.
well,
Hmm.
maybe I'm not that great of a provider. This person has been stuck here for 2 months.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's very uncomfortable to and it a big relief when they finally get to, you know, high level of care and they come back a different person is a very nice experience. Um, and I find teenagers slash young adults, especially young adults, to be the most challenging people to work with
Hmm.
because especially like that 18-year-old that technically they are an adult and um the parents don't have as much, say, and it's it's challenging because you're having to convince a very sick brain, to make the call,
Hmm.
and try to get the family involved. And oftentimes the family doesn't know what to do, doesn't know how to intervene, doesn't know how to have those conversations. And it takes a lot of convincing. I've had several clients that came in without, not because they had an eating disorder, but because they wanted to lose weight. And as I'm talking with them, I'm like, well, let me tell you about where we draw the line between disordered eating patterns and
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
actual eating disorder, because sometimes it takes them a while to even accept, that this is more than just, oh, I emotionally eat sometimes or things like that.
Hmm.
So it's definitely a confusing and like scary part
Yeah.
of the job to go through because Sometimes I'm kind of holding my breath, like I'm gonna say eating disorder, they're gonna scream at me, gonna call
Yeah.
me crazy. Like, it's not an eating disorder. I haven't had my period. I haven't got a gynecologist that I'm seeing. And I'm like, huh.
I know they're clueless. So you got him like if you think of the stages of change, you got to get him from pre-contemplation to contemplating, right? Like that has to happen. As dietitians, we have to know the diagnostic criteria. Like on the back of your hand, you got to know what it is. You can't diagnose, but you can kind of, I suspect this is what you're dealing with, and kind of like put that out there. So you have to kind of know what you're seeing in the room through experience and also know it through the knowledge, right? You have to understand what all these criteria are and all of that so that you can really inform the client in a way that they can eventually understand. So,
Yeah.
whew, yeah. So length of time, and getting them into the door,
Jill,
oh yeah. Uh-huh.
we didn't break. We're supposed to do the intro and be like on the back end, we'll talk more about this. And we
Well,
just kept
we
going.
we haven't gotten into that part yet. I just was kind of validating. I was about to end it off and go in there. Do you want to?
Okay, no, I'm sorry. Just wanted to make sure because I was like, we can continue, from just cut my interruption, but I just wanted to make sure that we didn't, because I was starting to hold back. Like I don't know if we're supposed to pause and then continue on the back end and stuff like that. But
Well, I thought we could
sorry.
build on what we kind of talked about a little bit. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting.
no, it's okay. Um, so length of time and all of that, like once they get in the intake call, that's a challenge. We talked about that. But a lot of that's going to be what the intake specialist is looking at in terms of like their insurance benefits and getting them, and we'll talk more about this in the back end, but how long they stay there and then will be oftentimes dictated by insurance, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the back end piece of it. But getting in the door is one thing, but then how long they stay there or what level of care is a challenge. So we'll talk more about that when we reconnect. And then, appropriateness of starting, I think, too, is just the aspect of you want to have enough experience, have someone that supervises you so that you can, because a lot of people that I've supervised, when they're talking to me, I'm like, this person needs to be in a higher level of care. You've no business working with this individual outpatient, and not that they can't hold space, right? Or it may be 4 to 6 weeks, but hey, you need to start talking about higher level of care. And so that's where supervision can be really helpful, or just having that experience and then really understanding kind of the levels of care, like we're going through APA guidelines, kind of learning to use your gut feeling when you first meet a client, and kind of what level of care they need, et cetera. So we'll talk a lot more about that in depth in the back end. But anything else to add, Mateus, before we close out?
No, I think those are good points.
Okay. All right. We'll see you back there. Join us soon.
See ya.